Hey everyone, it's Leanne. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to share with you the Copic coloring version of my critters here that I used in my Critters of the Sea birthday card that I created for my nephew. You may have watched the video where I created the card, and if you did, thank you for joining me now to see the Copic coloring. And if you did miss that video, I'll link it at the end of this video so you can take a look. So I'm going to start with my little dolphin, and I'm going to do him very basic, so I'm using a very light gray. This one's kind of hard to go too crazy with. I did want my critters to have natural colors, but I'm going to add a little bit of interest with some other colors soon. You'll see that happen. So I'm just starting with a toner gray, and this is T0. And just putting that base down. I like to put the base down first. I find it's easier to build from lightest to darkest colors. So now I'm coming in with my shadow color, which is also in the toner colors. Just stepping it up a couple to toner 2 and just creating the shadows where I feel that it would give the most curvature and show off his shape as a dolphin and make him look a little bit more 3D. So I'm just doing light wispy brush strokes up along the bottom edge and underneath his flippers and around his mouth too. That's important because that creates kind of that curved beak that you see with the dolphins. And then between the little flippers and his tail as well, his tail fins. And so once I have all of my shadows laid down, I like to come back in with that base color that I started with. So in this case, the toner 0, and just blend the top edge where the dark shadow color just kind of blends into that background, just making it a little bit softer. And I like to do this while the color is still kind of wet on the page. I get a nicer blend that way, I find. And so now I'm adding the little bit of interest with the darker shadow color, just going over anywhere I put shadows, not doing the full shadow, but just the darkest, deepest points of that shadow. So this kind of creates like a third layer. And so it also is giving a little bit of interest because this is more of a pink color. So this is RV95 Rose Violet or Red Violet. And so I find that it just gives a little more interest to the gray. It doesn't look so flat by adding this reddish color in. So now I'm coming in and just emphasizing those colors. And at the mouth, I like to add a little bit of a circle at the back of the smile line, just to help that curvature look a little more 3D. And so as I put these shadows in, every time I do a layer of shadows, I always make sure to come in and blend it with that lightest background color on the upper edges of that shadow, just so that blend is nice and soft. And so I've come in a few times with that red violet color, that RV95, just to emphasize and darken up the deepest parts of those shadows. And so now I'm moving over to my octopus, and I apologize, my camera stopped as I was coloring the base, so I didn't catch all of that, but this is where I have him started. So I decided to do him blue just to add a little bit more color to my card. My background was blue, so I had to be careful with this one. I had to pick a lighter blue that would stand out and keep him pretty light so that he really popped still against that darker blue background. So because I needed to keep this really light, I came in with a base of B quad 0, and then I'm just using B01 to do the shadows. And again, just kind of following the curvatures of the creature shape and doing my shadows from the bottom up, and then coming in with that background color, just blending out those feathered edges, just so they blend to the background a little bit more. With the octopus, it's tricky because he does have all his legs, and so you want to make sure your shadows are all going the right way. So I did put some cheeks on my octopus as well, just to make him a little more friendly. And I always like to add the cheek colors at the end. So now I'm working on my turtle, and I want to pull in a few different colors into him just to give some visual interest, so it's not all the flat same colors. So for the turtle's little head and his little flippers or paws or whatever they're called, I'm going to do kind of a yellowy green. And to keep those very light too, because I really want the critters' faces to be light so that you can see the stamped eye and mouth line that are in the black. So for the turtle, I'm using G20 as my base, And then I'm also coming in with YG13, so kind of moving over one column in the Copic chart just to add a little more interest and push it a little bit more towards those yellow greens to add to the blend. So now the shadows I'm keeping coming out from underneath his shell, I want to do around the back of his neck where the shell also meets, and then along the bottom of his head so that it creates kind of that curvature as well. And then a little bit of shadow coming up from his beak. So that's another kind of rounded part of his head, and I want to make sure that that reads as a three-dimensional item as well. So now for the turtle shell, I made a mistake here, and I'm going to point out what I did. It's very seldom that I will start from scratch again. I usually just try to make something work, and a lot of times I have happy accidents. This one, I did screw up that little part that I just colored on his shell, and it has mostly to do with the shadow. I treated that one section like an independent element, creating the shadow up from the bottom and making it look 3D. But what I really should have did was treat the entire turtle shell as one element, and all of the shadows coming up from the baseline at the bottom of the turtle shell. So I did try to correct it a little bit with my shadowing, and all the other pieces I do correctly. So now I'm creating the base color and then putting the shadow in, coming up from the bottom, working all of my shadow edges pointing in towards the center point of that shell. And this is to create that round kind of curvature look and do that sort of the cylindrical look of his shell. So I'm doing this in very small sections too, and the reason why I'm doing that is to keep the paper wet when I apply my shadow layer so that it blends really nicely with that background base. So I like to lay down my shadows, as I mentioned, when the base color is still wet on the page, and I get the best blends that way. And so I found that working in smaller sections like this, treating each one separately, and doing a couple at a time and then moving on, didn't allow that paper to dry too much. So I was able to work with what I had already created, and the blends came out really nicely. For that last piece in the middle, I'm also doing my shadow from the bottom up, and so that kind of makes the sections of the turtle shell themselves feel a little bit 3D as well. So then just coming in with that base color once again and blending out the shadows where the shadow edges hit that base color. For the lines in his shell, I'm going to do a lighter color and more of a gold tone. So kind of pulling away from the greens a little bit just to add a little more visual interest, but still staying on the yellow side, which complements his head and little flipper colors. So again, creating all the shadows the same, pulling them in from the outside edges up towards the center makes that look more rounded overall. And so I will save these colors and use a few of them throughout the rest of my critters as well, just to kind of tie the scene together so I'm not using a total slew of different colors, kind of keeping a similar palette, and that helps visually to tie things together a little bit easier. So now using one of my turtle colors, I'm going to come in and color the kelp or the seaweed, and just putting down a base color first, a mid-tone green. This is the one that I used on the flippers and the head. So I'm just laying down my base color, getting that in place, and then I'm going to come in with my shadow color and really thinking about where the light's hitting and what is going to be the shadow side. Where the two kelp pieces meet together, there's going to be a shadow where they touch and overlap, and then the back sides of the kelp that are away from the point of light. So just to emphasize those shadows, I'm going to come in with one more color, just a little bit darker, and that's from the gold of the outline of the turtle shell. And so just touching the deepest parts of those shadows, not doing the entire surface of the shadow, but just the deepest parts, just to give it a little bit more rounded look. Similar to what I did with the dolphin as well, when I brought in that pink color in the deepest parts of the shadows. And I find this just helps to really create that 3D look. Just gives it a little more boost. So now I'm going to color my goldfish. This guy's kind of tiny. I'm going to keep him kind of simple. So I'm going to use a nice bright yellow for the base. And so using that, I'm going to come in with a shadow color. Now when I put a shadow color on him, I found it wasn't really enough contrast. So I upgraded that for a darker orange color, just stepping over one in the Copic chart from the yellow column to the yellow red column, and just giving him a bit more of a pronounced shadow. So now I'm ready to create my snail. I was going to do him in 3 different colors of the shell, each section of the shell, and I ended up at the end just kind of putting them all together. I couldn't find a combination of colors that I liked that I wanted to keep separate, but I did start with doing a pink base, more of like on the red side, and just putting down a nice light, kind of a medium tone red, and then coming in with a darker red for the shadow. And so again, I really want to keep the curvature look of each section of that shell independent. So I'm going to create shadows up from the bottom line or the bottom outline of each section. And so that's going to help create that curvature look and just softly feathering up the shadow strokes from the bottom edge. And so every time I do put down a shadow, I do like to come back in and just softly blend it one more time with my base color. That's a lighter color. Now I just want to make those shadow colors really dark, and I found that they were kind of blending, so I came in with a really rich magenta, a very dark magenta color, so like an RV66, and you have to be careful with this one because it doesn't blend as easily because it's a darker color, but just ever so lightly doing flicks in the shadows, and then coming in with my medium tone color to soften them up, and then just my base color to soften up the edges again. Now for the body, I'm doing more of a skin tone, like a lighter skin tone, an E11, E13 for the shadows. So the shadows are going to be underneath the shell where they meet, the top of his body and his head. And then his little flippers where they're coming out, or his claws, I guess, where his little arms are coming out from his body. I'm going to put some shadows on the undersides there, and then around the sides of the little clippers. And it is a little tricky to get in there because it's a very tiny space, so it doesn't take a lot of color to kind of give that 3D look. I really have to just kind of drop it in and not leave my marker on the paper too long, or it just bleeds too much and just kind of colors the entire body. I don't get that 3D look that I'm going for. I have to be careful of that. And then sometimes as the marker dries, I will come in a second time and just redo those shadows, especially if I feel that they've blended a little too much. And this happens more when you have colors that are very close together. It doesn't happen too much though. So I have him almost ready, just another coat of the darker shadows. And then of course we got to give him some cheeks and put a few cheeks on the other critters as well. So now I'm ready to do my seahorse. I'm going to do him more in the yellow-red colors, but keeping him light overall. So I'm going to lay down a base of YR01, which is more of an orange color, but a peachy color almost, but again, very light. And then building up the shadows, I'm going to come in with YR15, and this is a bit more orange looking, so it's really going to elevate that orange that's in that background a little bit more. And so he's got a big belly. I'm going to do a nice shadow along the front. And as I get to the widest part of the belly, I'm going to try and make that shadow just taper out a little bit more to create that belly look, so it looks a little bit more bigger and rounder. And then coming back around the back where his little spokes stick out, doing a little bit of shadow there and along the bottom of his chin and jawline. And again at his mouth line as well, and I'm just going to keep going back over. Now I found the shadows were a little light, so I came in again with a YR18 just to put in the deepest parts, because I found that the shadows weren't separating enough, creating that, that layer of depth that I wanted. But you can see as I put down this darker shadow, just in the darker parts of where it needs to be, it just creates a more of a 3D look and gives that pop that I'm trying to achieve. And with the little horns or spikes along his back, you don't really see a lot of that, so you only need a touch of shadow in there. You don't need too much at all. If he's more front-faced, if he was more side profile or even more of his back, then you could put more of a shadow to really exaggerate that but in this case it's not needed. So for my shell, I'm going to come in with some blue as well, just keeping it light, just using a B000 for my base, and then a simple B01 for the shadow on this, which also matches the shadow on my octopus. And with each of the separator lines on the shell, I'm just going to put a little bit of shadow behind them as well, just to create that kind of rippled depth look. And now the last one is my little fish, and he's going to be pretty simple too. He's bigger than the other fish, but still not too much room for detail. So just a wash of R20, and then a shadow of R22, just flipping up across the bottom. Very simple coloring for him, because there isn't too much room to play. And so just coming in once more with that base color, blend the edges of that shadow so that they don't look too hard. They're a little bit softer. And anytime I have Copic marker bleed outside the edge, I just use a touch of my 0, and in my colorless blender you may see me do that. And that just kind of draws out that pigment a little bit, and most of it just washes away. As a finishing touch, I brought my gel pen in and did some highlight lines just to kind of create that bubbly look, that kind of gummy, shiny look. And I thought that looked really cute. It was perfect for the card that I created. And it is easy to get carried away. Adding the lines is really fun, but you can pretty much put them anywhere. And so I have those all in place. So now my critters are ready to cut out. Here's a look at my final card. I'm really happy with how this turned out. If you haven't seen the video for the card making, I'll link it after the video here if you want to check it out. If you did like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you're notified as I post more videos. Thank you so much for watching.